The most important thing to understand about the 2026 U.S.-Israeli war on Iran is that it did not begin as a normal air campaign. It began as a leadership kill campaign wrapped inside an air campaign. The opening objective was not simply to crater runways, burn fuel depots, or knock out radar. It was to paralyze the Iranian state by killing the men who made strategic decisions, controlled internal repression, supervised missile retaliation, and linked the military, intelligence, and political systems into one chain of command. That is why the first day of the war matters so much. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched their opening strikes, and Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed almost immediately. NPR reported that Iran itself confirmed his death and declared 40 days of mourning. Al Jazeera and AP then documented how the strike also removed a cluster of senior defense and security figures around him, turning the first hours of the war into a true decapitation strike rather than a conventional opening bombardment. The core of the campaign was simple in concept but very difficult in execution. Find the leadership, compress the kill chain, and open Iranian airspace fast enough that follow-on assassinations could continue after the first shock. ABC and CBS, citing officials and sources familiar with the operation, reported that Khamenei's routines and whereabouts had been tracked for months, and that U.S. intelligence learned he would attend a Saturday morning meeting at a compound in Tehran with other senior officials. That intelligence reportedly moved the timing of the strike forward. ABC described the attack as a precise, large-scale joint operation on the office compound in central Tehran, and CBS said the CIA had gathered intelligence over months that was shared with Israel before the missile strike that killed Khamenei and other officials. That first strike was devastating not only because Khamenei died, but because it appears to have hit the leadership cluster around him almost simultaneously. Al Jazeera's roundup of the opening casualties identified several senior figures widely reported killed in the same phase of the war, including Ali Shamkhani, Abdul Rahim Mousavi, Aziz Nasirzadeh, and Mohammad Pakpour. These were not symbolic targets. Shamkhani had become central to defense policy and nuclear negotiations. Mousavi sat at the top of the armed forces hierarchy. Nasirzadeh was defense minister. Pakpour commanded the IRGC. Taking out all of them at once meant Iran was losing not one brain, but several layers of decision-making at the same time. Israel's own description of the first 24 hours helps explain why those hits were possible. On March 1st, the IDF said the Israeli Air Force had flown more than 700 sorties and dropped thousands of munitions in order to clear the way to Tehran within 24 hours. The same IDF update said Israeli aircraft were already operating with air superiority over Tehran and were striking ballistic missile launchers, headquarters, air defense systems, and command centers. In other words, the assassinations did not happen in isolation. They were nested inside a much broader suppression campaign against the very systems that might have protected the leadership or complicated follow-on strikes. That is the first big answer to the question of how Israel was able to hit and kill so many leaders. It did not wait to build a permissive battle space after the leadership strikes. It built that permissive battle space at the same time. The first 72-hour U.S. fact sheet for Operation Epic Fury said CENTCOM had already struck over 1,700 targets, including command and control centers, IRGC Joint Headquarters, IRGC Aerospace Forces Headquarters, integrated air defenses, ballistic missile sites, Iranian Navy ships, submarines, anti-ship missile sites, and military communications nodes. By the first 10 days, that figure had risen to over 5,000 targets, and by March 16th, the official U.S. number was 7,000 plus targets, 6,500 plus combat flights, and 100 plus Iranian vessels damaged or destroyed. That scale matters. It means the leadership assassination campaign rode on top of a massive, simultaneous effort to break Iranian military coordination, air defense, and retaliation capacity. The second part of the answer is intelligence fusion. Public reporting suggests this was not one stream of intelligence, but several. ABC and CBS pointed to long-term CIA tracking of Khamenei and to intelligence about a meeting at the Tehran compound. Separately, a Financial Times report summarized by the Times of Israel said Israel had spent years exploiting Tehran's traffic camera network to monitor the movements of Khamenei's security detail. That reporting said Israeli intelligence used AI tools and data analysis, much of it associated with Unit 8200, to sort through patterns of movement and confirm when senior officials were converging on the target area. The same report said cellular service around Pasteur Street was disrupted on the day of the strike, potentially complicating efforts to warn bodyguards or move the principal out in time. These details are reported, not officially admitted, but they fit the broader pattern: persistent surveillance, pattern of life mapping, and timing the strike for a known leadership convergence. The third part is that Israel appears to have had a live human layer inside the battle space as well. Reuters reported on March 13th that Israel had entered a new phase of the war by targeting IRGC checkpoints based on tip-offs from informants on the ground. That report matters beyond the checkpoints themselves. It suggests Israeli targeting inside Iran was not based only on satellites, signals, and aircraft. It also depended on local or human reporting that could confirm movement, identify manned positions, or cue aircraft against fleeting targets. When a campaign reaches that point, it is no longer just an air war, it is a penetration war. The operational sequence becomes clearer when we follow the systems Israel said it was destroying. On March 2nd, the IDF said it had struck command centers belonging to Iran's Interior Security and Ministry of Intelligence in central Tehran, including over 10 headquarters of the Ministry of Intelligence and numerous Quds Force headquarters. The same day, the IDF said the Air Force had fired hundreds of munitions at dozens of missile launchers, air defense systems, and firing arrays. On March 4th, the IDF released footage of an F-35I Adir striking a ballistic missile launcher in western Iran and said it had used over 5,000 munitions since the start of the operation. On March 5th, it said it had struck hundreds of launch sites and neutralized more than 300 ballistic missile launchers. By March 8th, the IDF said approximately 3,400 strikes had been carried out across Iran. More than 150 Iranian air defense systems had been disabled and roughly 7,500 munitions had been dropped. That is the second big takeaway. Israel did not succeed because it found one magical vulnerability. It succeeded because it systematically tore down the architecture that protects leaders: radar, surface-to-air missiles, military communications, launch crews, headquarters, security compounds, and intelligence buildings. Once those systems are degraded, leadership targets become much easier to reach. Even Israeli claims made later in the war reflect that logic. By March 18th, Israeli military spokesman Nadav Shoshani said more than 85% of Iran's air defense systems and radar infrastructure had been neutralized, along with over 70% of its ballistic missile firing capability. Those numbers are Israeli claims and should be treated as such, but they are consistent with the progression visible in IDF statements from March 1st through March 8th. Seen in that light, the opening decapitation wave was not a one-off miracle. It was the first successful expression of a kill chain that kept getting shorter as Iran's defensive systems were stripped away. That is why the assassinations continued. On March 17th, AP reported that Israel killed Ali Larijani, secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and General Gholam Reza Soleimani, head of the Basij. AP noted that Larijani had become one of the most powerful figures in Iran after Khamenei's death, which is precisely why his killing mattered. He was not just another official, but one of the men helping hold the regime together after the original leadership was shattered. Israel also said it struck more than 10 Basij posts across Tehran in the same phase. This was strategically significant because Larijani represented a bridge figure inside the Iranian system. He understood the security establishment, the diplomatic track, and the internal balance of power. After Khamenei's death, Iran had formally created a three-member interim leadership council made up of President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni-Ejei, and Ayatollah Alireza Arafi until a successor could be chosen. But formal structure and real power are not always the same in authoritarian systems under wartime stress. Larijani was widely seen as one of the people actually steering crisis decision-making in the days after the initial strike. That is why AP's description of him as one of the most powerful figures in the country after Khamenei is so important. Killing Larijani meant Israel was no longer just cutting off the head of the pre-war regime, it was killing the men improvising a wartime replacement order. Iran's formal response after the opening strike also shows both the success and the limit of decapitation. On March 8th, AP and Reuters reported that the Assembly of Experts had named Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader, so the regime did not collapse. collapse. It adapted, but it adapted under duress, after first moving through the interim council mechanism created by Article 111 of the Constitution. That is exactly what a decapitation strike is supposed to do, even when it does not cause regime fall. Force succession under fire, compress decision time, and increase confusion inside the command structure. The assassination of Esmail Khatib, Iran's intelligence minister, on March 18th pushed that disruption further. Reuters first reported the Israeli claim that Khatib had been eliminated in an overnight strike. Later that day, President Pezeshkian confirmed Khatib had been killed. This mattered for two reasons. First, it was the third high-level killing in roughly 2 days after Larijani and Soleimani. Second, Khatib sat atop the intelligence ministry, which meant the state was losing another key node in its ability to identify infiltrators, track internal dissent, and protect senior officials from future strikes. Around the same time, the IDF said it had struck more than 10 intelligence headquarters in Tehran. The logic is obvious: kill the minister, hit the ministry, and deepen the regime's blindness at the same moment. There is also a Lebanon dimension, but this is where accuracy requires restraint. Reuters confirmed that an Israeli strike on the Ramada hotel building in Beirut killed at least 4 people, while Israel said the target was Iranian commanders operating in the Lebanese capital. Al Jazeera similarly reported that Israel said it targeted key Quds force commanders there, but did not name them. That is why the safest analytic conclusion is not to repeat every circulating name from open source lists. The stronger claim is that Israel was clearly extending the decapitation campaign beyond Iran proper, using urban precision strikes in Lebanon against IRGC Quds nodes connected to Hezbollah and regional operations. The scale of physical destruction behind this campaign is now large enough to describe in system terms, rather than anecdote. The U.S. March 16th fact sheet lists the target sets as command and control centers, IRGC headquarters buildings, IRGC intelligence sites, integrated air defenses, ballistic missile sites, Navy ships and submarines, anti-ship missile sites, military communications, ballistic missile and drone manufacturing, weapons production and storage bunkers, surface-to-air missile facilities, and military support infrastructure. By March 19th, the Wall Street Journal reported that the combined U.S. Israeli campaign had surpassed 16,000 strikes on Iranian assets, with Israel saying it had conducted about 8,500 strikes using more than 12,000 munitions, while the United States had struck at least 7,800 targets and damaged or destroyed more than 120 Iranian vessels. Those later figures are not a neutral audit. They are compiled from military reporting, but they show the scale at which the leadership assassination campaign was being sustained. And yet this is where a serious US-style analysis has to resist triumphalism. Decapitation worked tactically. It did not produce a clean strategic finish. AP's analysis of the targeted killing campaign notes that assassinating top leaders can severely disrupt an adversary, but often fails to deliver decisive political outcomes on its own. That warning already fits the Iran case. Iran lost Khamenei, then Larijani, then Soleimani, then Khatib, and still continued to fire missiles and drones at Israel and across the Gulf. Reuters reported that about 200 U.S. troops had been wounded across the conflict by March 16th, with most already returned to duty. Civilian and military losses also mounted across Israel and Gulf states as Iran retaliated. In other words, the campaign succeeded in tearing holes through Iran's leadership and military systems, but it did not instantly remove Iran's capacity for dangerous retaliation. So the right conclusion is not that Israel found some mystical method of perfect warfare. The right conclusion is more precise. Israel made these killings possible by combining 5 things at once: long-term intelligence penetration, real-time cueing from US and Israeli surveillance, rapid destruction of Iranian air defenses and launch systems, repeated strikes on command and control and intelligence nodes, and the compression of the kill chain so that leaders could be hit while moving, meeting, or reconstituting. The result was not merely the death of individual men. It was the systematic shredding of the architecture that allowed Iran to function coherently at the top. That is why the 2026 campaign will likely be studied not just as a bombing campaign, but as one of the clearest modern examples of a state-level decapitation strategy executed in parallel with a full-spectrum suppression of air defense, missile, naval, intelligence, and internal security systems.